What is nationalism? Nationalism is government in a national interest. This is my simple and strong definition. Unfortunately, others do not agree with me. Others who call themselves nationalists do not agree with me, but then they do not have a quick and easy definition of nationalism, which I define as government in the national interest. If it were designed, if it were defined in this way, then then we could be asking ourselves what it means to govern in the national interest. I suppose people are reluctant to agree to this definition simply because it is who are I who am insisting on it. Really, my definition should be the default definition of nationalism because nobody has anything better, have they? I don't think they do. I have tried to get this definition accepted, and an objector said that we do not know what the national interest is, and we will probably never agree. But I disagree with his assessment because although the national interest is often in dispute, there are certain things that would not be in dispute whether you come on the right or left side of the political spectrum. Not that I accept this right left classification of political views, but for those who accept this classification, I think they would have to agree that nationalism means government in the national interest. You could say that there are different kinds of nationalism, such as ethno-nationalism and white nationalism and civic nationalism, but they are categories of nationalism. But the overarching definition of nationalism is government in the national interest. And I like to think that we have not completely lost all sense of proportion and reason in, in that we can still agree that in order to govern in the national interest, there needs to be a functioning moral system after we have agreed on an official moral system. What is a functional moral system? It is one that is generally accepted to be good enough or fair enough, and nobody or not enough people are thinking of overthrowing it, meaning that it is stable. I do not think that our current situation is stable. I think liberalism and representative democracy is coming to the end of its days. And so a new system is to be proposed, and I am proposing it. Not that anyone else seems to want to join me in proposing another political system that is different to what we have now, which is representative democracy. Representative democracy is part of the liberal order. We know that the Soviets, the Soviet Union and China have a different political system, though they do call it a people's democratic dictatorship. And they do call the West a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. So, really, if you think about it, the right and left are divided between capitalism and communism, and communism is Marxist Leninism, and Marxist Leninism is Marxist Leninism proposes a political system known as democratic centralism, and this is the current system that China operates. In other words, it is a one party state. And this is what I support. But the problem with supporting a one party state is that you will be accused of being a Nazi, a fascist, or a communist because previous versions of, well, the currently operating form of communism, that is in that is socialism with Chinese characteristics in China, is a one party state. But even then, the Chinese would say, no, no, that's not true. We have plenty of different parties. But having looked at the different parties that they have, I think they're just groups that have official representation. But anyway, the idea is that all the other parties are under the umbrella of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and it would limit the operation of all the other political parties as well as the other religions that are recognized in China. So, really, the crucial difference between representative democracy and a one party state is being considered to be liberal and democratic, and the other thing, which is obviously considered to be an enemy to liberalism and being smeared with a brush of being called Nazi, fascist, and communist. That isn't a problem with me because I think we can use George Washington's farewell speech warning Americans against political parties to say that being a one party state is not necessarily fascist or Nazi or communist, but Washingtonian. And this is a position that I will have to repeatedly emphasize every time somebody talks about some election. That will be an opportunity for me to declare myself to be against representative democracy and to make it very clear to anyone who will listen what my position is. I think it's very important to understand that if you participate in representative democracy, you are part of the problem, and therefore the best and quickest way of dissociating yourself from being part of the problem is to say you support the Washingtonian idea of a one-party state, and then be prepared to discuss and defend it, or if you don't feel up to doing that, pass these people on to me and I will explain my position again and again and again, as I know I inevitably must. I think the idea of becoming a one party state is so heretical that even people like Caleb Morpin dare not be seen to be discussing it. Because I suppose if he is talking about an America of anti-imperialists, then I suppose that's kind of un-American when you think of Manifest Destiny and the undeniably expansionist nature of the American empire. But but what I'm proposing is really imperial reform, and imperial reform would be a suitable and timely thing, bearing in mind the difficulties America is having precisely because of its political system of representative democracy, which Washington warned against from the beginning. So I have noticed that a lot of Americans find it very difficult to discuss, and even if they do understand what I'm saying, they fear. They fear to support me because they don't want to be accused of being Nazi, fascist, or communist. But it's not any of those things, it's merely Washingtonian. And I would argue that if Washington were able to give us his opinion, then he would have to say that he supports democratic centralism in the form that it is practiced in China, in a one party state. And the only reason why America is so nervous of China is that it's doing so amazingly well with its robots and infrastructure and doing all the things that I'm sure Westerners wish their own government would do for them, for their people. So I would like to rehabilitate the reputation of nationalism by calling it government in the national interest. And once that is done, it would be rehabilitated because if we all live under governments, we would want the government to govern in the national interest simply because, well, we don't want it to not govern in the national interest. Of course, we would like the government to do what we would like, but I think most of us accept that there are, other people apart from us, and we can't always have things our way. And if we're required to make sacrifices and pay taxes and do things we don't really want to do, we want to think that it's going to a good cause, i.e., the national interest. So I just don't see what the problem is with discussing whether representative democracy is undermining the national interest. And if you would read Washington's farewell speech, he explains very clearly what would happen if this system were allowed to take its course and do its damage, which it has done. But it seems nobody wants to acknowledge this because representative democracy is a sacred cow of the current political orthodoxy, which is, I think, past its sell by date. So, on the question of fake nationalism, who is a fake nationalist? I suppose the ethno nationalists would say civic nationalists are fake nationalists and vice versa. But I think it's impossible if you are an empire to be monoracial just because it is, well, you wouldn't be an empire if you had only one kind of person, one kind of racial group. And most countries consist, well, any nation basically consists of a union of tribes. So think of the Jews. I mean, they talk about their 12 tribes of Israel. And and each tribe has, a specific speciality. The Cohens and the Levites, and I'm well, not exactly sure exactly what, but that they are the tribes of the priesthood, and then there will be the others. I'm also a bit vague about them, but obviously it's a kind of tribal departmentalism, and that's basically what it is. Um, in that, for any society to be viable, it has to have male and female, right? It can't be all men or all women because they're not, obviously they'll just die off and not replace themselves. And apart from that, you would also need a working class, and you need a leader if you're going to be a proper group. Yeah, sorry for the interruption. Um, where was I? Well, thank you for seeking genuine. I'm so happy you agree with me because I've just been having so much trouble with people just pretending not to understand my position. And when I first read Washington's Fair, well, I didn't read it. I listened to it. Right, this is what happened. Trump won, and there were well, he didn't win, or the election was stolen. But anyway, so I was following the goings on in Congress very closely. And in February 2021, I heard the speech and I nearly fell off my swivel chair because um, there was just so much of the advice in Washington's speech that was being ignored. And I thought, are they crazy? Do they not speak English anymore? Why is that senator reading all that speech and without any you know consciousness that his advice was being ignored? And then I tried to speak to individual Americans, and well, a lot of them, well, they just couldn't be got to read it, right? They would say, "Yes, I was listening to it last night on YouTube being read out, and then I fell asleep." Or, "Yes, I started reading it a few months ago. I've yet to finish it." Or some would say point blank, "I'm not going to read it. The language is archaic. The sentences are too long, and what does it matter?" Or things like, I prefer Jefferson. And I thought, well, what can I do if Americans don't even respect their founding fathers? Well, who are they going to respect? I mean, if all they're going to be saying is, "Well, I prefer Jefferson. I do like fighting elections. It's so much fun, particularly when we, elect a president who breaks all his election promises, and we love the feeling of hope when we after that has happened, when we know a president has broken all his promises, we're going to look forward to the next one, and our hearts will be alive with hope, and we'll just carry on that way forever. So I don't think that's particularly constructive, and the reason why the West is so nervous of China is that they're doing quite well, aren't they? I don't know if you listen. I don't know. Excuse me. If you look at, if you come across videos of how China is and how they get free drone shows every night and it looks so good and it's all free and their streets are clean and crime free, and I'm sure we would like some of that here. Infrastructure, state of the art, bridges, but anyway, we don't. And I'm saying China is doing so well because it has a rational political system that cuts the crap and corruption out of it. Yes, I know China has had problems with corruption, but and they've obviously dealt with it. And I would also suggest that you read the constitution of the Chinese Communist Party and compare it with the constitution of the Republican or Party or the Democrat Party, and you'll see a very marked difference in its length and the um, seriousness that the Constitution is drafted. And also, just reading between the lines, you can tell that there were problems before that have since been fixed. And actually, the Chinese are quite proud of their constitution because they've translated it into English so that you can find it. So I do recommend that you have a look at it if you can bear to read these documents, which I suppose not everybody else has the time and inclination to do. But what Washington said is true to this day. So he was this sage that, well, he just predicted the future. Let me read this article entitled "Why Was George Washington Opposed to Political Parties?" In the vast and storied history of this country, there has only ever been one president who did not represent a political party, George Washington. Every man since who has occupied that prestigious position has been elected to present not only the people but the platform and policies of a political party. When George Washington left public office, he cautioned the nation not to divide themselves into political parties. In his farewell address, he stated that the spirit of the party serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates a community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasionally riot and insurrection. Was he able to see into the future and the division his beloved nation would face in the years to come? Perhaps not, but he certainly saw with clarity the dangers of partisanship in this American experiment. In his administration, he attempted to form a government that was above partisan ties and petty squabbles, but that was not to be. But Lenin came along and fixed it with his democratic centralism. Why was George Washington opposed to the creation of political parties? Division in his cabinet. The dangers of political party tension was played out in the microcosm of Washington's own cabinet. In the years of his presidency, Thomas Jefferson, his Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton, his Secretary of the Treasury, vehemently disagreed with each other on a number of issues that arose in the administration. Hamilton vocally advocated for centralized government power, whereas Jefferson preferred for governmental power to be as close to the people as possible, rather than held in the lands of an elite few. Their animosity towards one another and their ideas created tension and hardship in the first administration, and Washington saw how potentially dangerous the creation of political parties would be, not only for future administrations but also for the nation as a whole. Division in the nation. In a republic such as ours, the people must seek the interest of the country over their own. Washington foresaw how the formation of political parties would devastatingly tamper with the Americans' ability to see members of the other party as fellow citizens rather than political enemies. To that effect, he wrote, the alternative domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, and sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. The division of the nation that Washington foretold has undoubtedly come to pass, though this is not a new or even surprising revelation. Our nation has been bitterly divided before, even to the point of a bloody civil war. As we consider how best to move forward as a nation, perhaps it is worth considering heeding this voice from our past, whose worries were proven right over time. However political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them up, which have lifted them to unjust dominion. The end. Well, it's obviously true, but people seem to be so heedless. People of modern times can't listen to the particulars and hear the through lines. Well, I think we know the history. I mean, we just, dismiss it or don't think it's worth knowing. But, well, if you look at China, the point is it's been rationally governed. And whatever problems they had before, they have, well, dealt with most of the problems. So it is something to consider, but we have to imagine, well, we have to anticipate the vested interests who will not be wanting to change the system because, well, my theory is that representative democracy is really a punch and judy show for children, really, who like participating in elections and take the whole thing seriously. And, well, they are part of the problem. How do we change their minds? I suppose we can. I'll give you the link in case you want to go away and read it and share it and talk about it to other people at your estuary meetings, maybe. When a psyche is split, it is much easier possessed by demons or led by the loudest, most chaotic voice. I think this metaphor can be seen in the two-party system currently marketing schemes of the US. Yes. Well, thank you, Megan, for being so ready to understand what I'm saying. I think I think most people can understand. I fear a lot of people pretend not to understand, and then they'll say, "Oh, look at how terrible China is," and I'm saying it's not. It's doing so well that I think a lot of Americans probably want to nuke it because it's doing so well. So let's be honest with ourselves on this. So, I mean, I guess the problem is people acknowledging that they've made a mistake for what, the last 250 years? Yes, I mean, okay. But once you get over it, and then you will begin the process of correcting yourself. And yes, predictably, people are going to call me now Nazi fascist, but well, I guess Americans can say, well, the none of those things. That idea is Washingtonian. And look, look at China. It's doing quite well. The people are, quite free there. And lots of Westerners go and live there. And they seem quite happy or even grateful that they can, well, at least get a, reasonably well paying job living there. So it's something to consider, and I suppose a lot of people who would not dream of going to China, and in fact prefer to think of China as some sort of shithole. Um, well, they would really need to consider whether acknowledging the truth is better than um, believing in your established narratives that you do not want to upset. Because yes, I get it that if you're used to believing that your parents are your parents, you don't really welcome being told that you were adopted. It's that kind of idea. So I suppose if you were a man and you thought your children were yours and they're not, you won't relish um, being told the truth. But perhaps it is better ultimately to know the truth and to not know the truth. And the other thing about political parties is that it is un-Islamic because the Quran forbids sectarianism, and what what are political parties but the um, the creation of amoral political tribes competing against each other, and obviously that shouldn't be encouraged if you want good government. And this is really a very simple point, I think. If you don't think that's enough, read George Washington's speech and kind of memorize the ideas and what he's saying, and maybe mention it at your next estuary meeting. And yes, I do understand that it is a sacred cow, but and it's very very hard to think that you're going to have to lead your sacred cow to slaughter, but you sort of need to do it to improve your government, and certainly prevent it from getting any worse. And and particularly bearing in mind what happened to Thomas Massey. So everybody thought, because of um, the terrible events in the Middle East and the genocide of the Gazans, that Thomas Massey would win, but he didn't. And according to Caleb Morpin, the reason why he didn't win was because the Boomer voters continued to vote in favour of Zionism. Because I guess, basically they didn't really care whom their government murders and maims in their name. And I suppose that they're comfortable enough, right? It's only the younger generation who feel that, the best day have come and gone and their parents have enjoyed it, but they they won't be seeing much of this golden age of American consumerism. And so they're not happy, and I think they might be inclined to blame boomers. And it might be, a dangerous time for boomers too. And so they could perhaps be, encouraged to maybe entertain the idea that a few mistakes have been made under their watch, and while they're not being personally blamed for it, they could, at least see to it that um, grievances by the younger generation um, can be aired and they're yes and acknowledged. That would be a start. As I see it, an international conversation needs to take place about the political system. And I think things are coming to a head about the future of Western government. And I think we already know that liberalism isn't working. And it may indeed have been the cause of so many problems. And perhaps we can have discussions about whether George Washington would have approved of democratic centralism. I mean, it is called democratic after all. So perhaps I will do another stream on the subject, but this time on democratic centralism. And I know, a lot of people are going to find themselves in difficulties about entertaining these ideas, but just tell yourself it's not Nazi, it's not fascist, it's not communist, but it's Washingtonian. And Washington probably would be perfectly okay with democratic centralism. Unless they can find, anything he ever said that suggests that he might not be.